Shabbat Shalom. On the Jewish calendar, we are in the midst of the season known as Omer. We begin counting from the second night of Pesach, the second Seder, all the way up 49 nights. We get to the 50th, it's the holiday of Shavuot. But in the secular calendar, we're in a very different season with a very different theme. We are, of course, in the secular calendar in the midst of graduation season. Here we are. Every year we come to it, and every year we get to hear different pieces of wisdom given to our graduates. I'm reminded of the story of the young man who had just graduated college, and he was very excited, and he shows up for his first day of work at the office. And sure enough, there he is, the first day of work at the office. He comes in, he goes right to see his supervisor, and the supervisor takes a broom and places it directly into the hands of this young man. The young man looks at the broom and he looks back up at the supervisor. And the man says, but what are you doing? Why are you giving me a broom? I'm a college graduate with a very prestigious liberal arts degree. The supervisor takes back the broom and says, oh, you're a college graduate? Let me show you how to use this. At this time of year, we think about the kind of advice that we want to give to high school and college graduates. Who's got one piece of wisdom, one quick piece of wisdom that you would share with a high school or college graduate? Anyone? Love your family. That's a good one. Try something new. Stop to smell the roses. Be humble. I've got a couple. One, it's not all about you. And two, don't leave. It's rough out there. Stay home. No? Because at high school and college graduations and other kinds of transitions, like, say, a bat mitzvah, that's not the message we want to give, even though sometimes that's in our hearts. As I've been paying attention during this graduation season, there have been two commencement speeches that have actually stood out to me. The first was Deborah Lipstadt, who spoke at Brandeis and said, while most people expect to hear a very uplifting message at a commencement ceremony, Professor Lipstadt, a professor of Holocaust Studies, says, I'm not going to give it to you. I'm going to talk about anti-Semitism and racism and homophobia and how they all go hand in hand. That is a depressing commencement speech, but still true. The other commencement speech that really stands out to me is the philanthropist who spoke at his alma mater and offered to the graduates $40 million to pay off their student loans. He wasn't at my college graduation. But what an optimistic, what a wonderful way to start one's transition into adulthood with having all of those loans forgiven. So we are here now in the midst of commencement season, graduation season, and I was trying to think, what does Judaism have to offer? Because on one hand, we could give that totally optimistic, everything's going to be great piece of advice, but to me, it rings hollow. Because look at the world around us. On the other hand, we could give that totally pessimistic viewpoint. Just take care of yourself because it's a rough world out there. But that seems disingenuous too, because look at the world around us. So what does Judaism have to say? And so we turn to our Torah portion this week, Parashat Bahar. And as I mentioned earlier, it's a small Torah portion in the book of Leviticus that our rabbis actually say took place earlier, what should have been the book of Exodus, as God gave the Torah to Moses on Sinai. There are three central mitzvot to our Torah portion. The first one, as Nicolette taught us so beautifully earlier, is about Shemitah, it's about the sabbatical year. And the second one is the Yovel, it's about the Jubilee year. Now, the Jubilee year is a fascinating concept. Every 50 years, our Torah teaches, the entire system gets a reboot. Every 50 years, any land that had been contracted or sold reverts back to its original owners. Every 50 years, anyone who had been enslaved or any families who've been enslaved are set free. Every 50 years was a massive reboot of the entire economic and agricultural system. And it never worked. Every 50 years was supposed to be this jubilee. The Torah says, let us proclaim liberty throughout the land. I'm heading to Philadelphia for a wedding tomorrow, where a certain bell carries those very same words. Let us proclaim liberty throughout the land. But it never worked. Our ancestors came up with this system and that system to make it work, but it never worked. Why? Because who wants to give up their slaves? Because who wants to give up their land? Because who wants to give out a business loan if you know in just a matter of time it's going to be forgiven? Similar with our Shemitah year, with the agricultural year. Every 7 years, the land was supposed to lie entirely fallow. No matter how much land you owned, in that 7th year, you weren't allowed to harvest it, you weren't allowed to tend to it. And anybody, the poor, the rich, anybody, could come and help themselves to your land. It's a brilliant idea of socialism. Everybody can take what they want, what they need. But it didn't work. They couldn't make it work. And so really, by and large, these ideas of Jubilee and Shemitah, sabbatical year, became theory. Now that's hard for God to accept. Because if you think about the history of humanity, it vacillates between God being entirely optimistic and terribly pessimistic. God creates humankind in God's image and in the image of the angels and the animals, and God creates this perfect set of people, Adam and Eve, and what do? They sin. They're kicked out of the garden. But that punishment isn't enough. Things get worse and worse and worse. And then there's a time of Noah. And it's so bad that God decides to flood the entire earth and wipe out all of humanity and start over again. So sure enough, that's what happens. And now God is optimistic, God is excited, now everything's going to be okay. The children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren of Noah, they're going to make the world great. They're going to perfect everything so that there's a total system of fairness and justice. And things just get worse. Until the time of Abraham. And God says, I'm going to try again. And so God chooses Abraham and then Isaac and Jacob and says, okay, with you, I'm going to try again. With you, the world can be perfected. With you, the world can achieve fairness and justice. And then things get bad again. And ultimately, God gives us the Torah. And said, here's a system. I'm telling you exactly how to do it. Here's halakha, here's Jewish law. Here's how you can make the world fair and just and perfect. And what do? We fail again. We keep trying to achieve this justice, this just and fair system. And we keep failing. God even spelled it out for us in this week's Torah portion with the Jubilee and sabbatical years. God says, here's how you can make this society perfect and fair and just. But we can't seem to do it. So what do? Are we pessimistic? Or are we optimistic? I'm reminded of the story of Rabbi Akiva. And the Talmud teaches that Rabbi Akiva was walking along with 4 of the greatest other rabbis of his generation. And the handful of them come upon Jerusalem and the Temple Mount. And there, some 2,000 years ago, they look and they see a Temple Mount totally in ruins. The Holy Temple had been destroyed. The other 4 rabbis, they rend their clothes and they begin to cry. They're so sad as they watch a fox, the dirty animal, walk out of where the Holy of Holies once stood. And they're there in tears and sadness. And Rabbi Akiva starts laughing. Rabbi Akiva starts laughing. Our sages turn to Rabbi Akiva and they say, "Nu, here our Temple Mount lies in ruins and you're laughing?" And Rabbi Akiva says, "Seeing the sight that we see now reminds me of 2 prophecies. The first one says that your temple will be destroyed. And the second one says, your temple will be built again. Children will turn to their parents, husbands and wives will celebrate, and the people Israel will know only joy and blessing." Rabbi Akiva said, without the first one having happened, I doubted the truth of our tradition. But now that I see the temple in ruins, now that I see that that first prophecy has come true, that our temple has been destroyed, then I know that the second prophecy will come true also. That just as the temple was destroyed, so will it be rebuilt. Just as we mourn now, so will there be a time of great celebration and simcha, of bat mitzvahs and ufrofs, when people will gather together in God's holy sanctuary and give thanks for the blessings in their life. Because without the first prophecy, you can't have the second prophecy. And maybe time and again, God realized that optimism, this undying optimism, was not perhaps the best approach. But God knew that pessimism was not the best approach either. And so our Torah portion this week, Parashat Bahar, ends. And I'm on page 746 in the Eitz Chaim Chumashim, and you're welcome to follow along with me. Because perhaps here God gives the best piece of advice to our high school and college graduates that there could be. It's not about total optimism, blind optimism. And it's not about pessimism either. It's about hopeful pragmatism. God says in chapter 26 of the book of Leviticus, "You shall not make idols for yourselves, or set up for yourselves carved images or pillars, or place figured stones in your land to worship upon, for I, the Lord, am your God." God says it's not about the money that we idolize. And it's not about the fame or the ego or the power or the success that we idolize. It's about remembering what's important. Because then God says, "Et shabtotai tishmeru, umikdashi tira'u, ani Adonai." You shall keep my Sabbaths and venerate my sanctuary, mine, the Lord's. God tells us, and God tells graduates everywhere, to keep fast to the altars of the Lord, which today are the synagogue and the Jewish home. That's the secret to success, to joy, to blessing, to hope, to happiness. And then God also reminds us about Shabbat, this day of rest, where we're supposed to give thanks and be content with everything we have, and be mindful of those around us who experience contentment only one day a week. And it's our job the other 6 days to elevate them, to raise them up, so that they have what they need, so that they can achieve what they need to achieve, so that they too, those who are most in need, can experience the blessing and the joy that we feel every week. And in that way, society can become fair and just in the way that God hopes it to be. This Shabbat of Parashat Bahar, may we be emboldened in our dedication to lead lives of holiness and meaning through the synagogue and through the Jewish home. And may God help us to use Shabbat to give thanks for that which is in our life, but also to remember all those who are in need. Ken Yehi Ratzon, may this be God's will, and let us sing together.